and you're just going to have to indulge me this morning. You will probably think I'm wearing this subject out, but last week, over the weekend, my three daughters, and I went to see the movie Elvis. How many of y'all have seen it? Have any of you seen it? I really recommend that you go see it. It could actually be a documentary for the disease of alcoholism and what enabling does, and a documentary on how the family is affected. And I think as addicts sometimes, and I'm speaking for myself, I don't think we have any clue to what we're doing to the family, how we're affecting the family. I always knew that my husband's alcoholism bothered our kids, affected our kids, but you know what? Come to find out, my eating disorder and the rage that I had from untreated codependency is what affected our children much more than their father's alcoholism. So if you have an eating disorder and you, or any addiction, we have to treat it every single solitary day. And, early in recovery, absolutely, we have to focus on recovery and, it's in ourselves and all of that. But after a while, we've got to get over ourselves and past ourselves so we can be there for our children and our spouses or anyone that we have harmed. The big book talks about making amends, and we don't have to, bow down to anyone. We don't. And we are responsible for our behavior in recovery. And so I want y'all to talk about, I want to open it up. I so promise I want to open it up. And I want to hear how your family relationships are, and how if you're early in recovery, how they are today. What is your part in helping the family come back together? What is your part about making amends? The addict, we absolutely have a big responsibility in that family system. We're not guilty. We have a disease that we didn't ask for, but we are responsible for treating it in all areas, physically, mentally, emotionally, and it is a spiritual recovery. Misty went to a birthday party last night for Misty. It was wonderful, a disco party, and I was talking to a man there that I have just known through Misty, and it was obvious by looking at him. He has an eating disorder, and I've been with him on social occasions several times, and we got to talking about, he started asking me questions about what we do. And by the time we left, he had tears in his eyes. He said, I had no idea that my eating, the overweight, the gaining and losing weight, that it was a disease. And he said it himself, and how it has affected his family. And he said, I've got to think about this. And he said, I want to talk to you again. I'm going to call Shades tomorrow. Anyway, it's not just falling down drunks, alcoholics, drug addicts, or any addiction. Any addiction will do. Any addiction is self-centered. It's all about us when we're in the addiction. It's the most self-centered mindset that we can ever get in, because what we're focused on is how to get our substance, where it is, how we're going to get it, how we're going to use it, how it makes us feel when we have it, how it makes us feel when we don't have it, and that can be love and sex addiction. Y'all know all of them. It can be gambling. It can be, you name it, drugs, alcohol, food. So, Y'all can tell I'm kind of on a roll. But when we went to see the movie, Elvis, he was popular in my era. I mean, I was a teenager and, an overweight, fat teenager, and worked at this fine, brand new theater, movie and house. And had been a TV telethon there in our little town in Odessa and Midland between there. It's called KMID TV, and they brought in some stars and anyway to perform for this telethon, and then they were going to do a pre and post little concert. So every day, this young man would come in at 2 o'clock. He bought a ticket. He'd watch the movie, came back the next day, bought a ticket. Anyway, on about the third day, he came in, and there was a hotel across the street, and he was staying over there. Come to find out, he was there to do that KMID TV telethon, and he was bored. He was bored to tears. Well, those of us who worked there were kids. I think I was about 14. And one of us, it might have been me, we brought a set of jacks, jacks, ball and jacks. And the doorman would even come over. I mean, we were bored to tears. There wasn't any customers. So we got to playing jacks on the counter. And one day this young man came in and he came by the counter. Long story short, he started playing jacks with us. He was very shy. He was very embarrassed. He couldn't hardly talk, but we taught him how to play jacks. That was Elvis Presley. He was shy then. He was seeking for love and someone to, talk to. Anyway,
So good.
the movie really, really did affect me. And it really affected me because of the devastation the disease did, not only in him, but in his family. And how many enablers. Most alcoholics and addicts can have up to as many, and research shows this, as many as 28 enablers, depending on how many family members. You're going to look at mom and dad, and then if there's siblings, they enable, they keep the secret, all of that. And then there's parole officers, there is probation officers, there's ministers, there's lawyers, there's judges. I mean, there's a long line of enablers for addicts. And there are for eating disorder people. So I want to briefly go through this. I know we talked about it last week, but addictions as a whole has gone up 13%. 13%. It is the most prevalent addiction in our society, and people don't talk about it. The fact that man started talking to me last night about his being overweight, and he asked me, he said, well, and I told him a little bit about my, being an overweight child, and then finding, diets, and I would lose 100 pounds and gain it back, lose it and gain it, and lose it and gain it. And when I got through talking about losing and gaining until I found recovery, he said, well, you just told my story. And he said, but how do I know that I have the disease of compulsive overeating? How do I know? And I said, well, there is a mirror over there. Won't you go look in that mirror? He said, boy, you tell it like it is, don't you? And I said, I may be the only person that'll ever tell you the truth about the weight. And it is every excess pound that a compulsive overeater carries, or the anorexics, every underweight or overweight that we carry around represents unresolved pain and anger. And, alcoholics and addicts, we're not a bunch of idiots. If we didn't get something out of using a substance, we would quit. But if we're addicts, if we have that brain of an addict, when we take in a substance, it eases the pain of living. And the reason that we treat all addictions here is, I was talking to a recovering alcoholic the other day that had many, 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 many years of being dry, but not much sobriety. Sobriety is about emotional sobriety. I'll call people in AA, and you can see them all the time. What I call them is being sick, sober, in AA. Oh, they're not drinking, and that's great. And they'll pick up those chips, that's great. And you walk into those homes and nothing has changed. The rage is still there. They don't want their wife going to Al-Anon. No, she doesn't need to go to Al-Anon. No, I'm sober. She doesn't need to go to Al-Anon. I love Alcoholics Anonymous, and I love the 12 steps. But those 12 steps will change us. There used to be a group, and I don't know if they're still there, no, they're not, because all of them have died. But there's a group of old men that used to play dominoes at the open door where I'd go to meetings, where I still go. And I would go into the noon meeting. They would have been there all morning long playing dominoes. When the meeting started, they would get up, go out for lunch. They wouldn't walk into that meeting. And, they were the ones that would criticize any and everything that a newcomer did. Anyway, it is called being sick, sober, in AA. Those 12 steps, folks, change us. They change us from the inside out. We get sick from the inside out, and we have to get well from the inside out. And I am preaching to the choir, because all of y'all are in recovery. I'm doing this for me, so just cut me a little slack. It just bothers me so much to see whole families suffer from the disease of addiction. So I want to go over it one more time. These are really different than I went over last week. But these are called survival skills tips for living with an addict. Survival skills. I want to tell you, not all addicts, not all alcoholics, not all eating disorder people recover. And that's sad. And so many families, if they even go to Al-Anon at all, well, they quit if their loved one dies of the disease. And what they'll do is usually go find another addict to marry. They'll look different, but by and large, they'll go to what's familiar and what's comfortable. But the three options for addicts of any sort is to live their life out in some form of an institution, either jail, prison, treatment centers, whatever, going from treatment center. Used to, when insurance paid so much, a lot of alcoholics would go from treatment center to get a few days of sobriety, get drunk, go back to treatment. You can't do that anymore unless you're wealthy. So live your life out in an institution. Or the second thing is to die of the addiction. Addictions kill, Or the third thing is recovery. Now, isn't that a simple, you have three options. Which one behind which door do you want it? Do you want door number 1 or door number 2 or door number 3? And, I say this all the time, we have to, particularly in early recovery, that first year, we have got to put as much effort into getting recovery as we did in getting sick. And for me, that was a lot of time. And when I started Al-Anon, I had been a stay-at-home mom. I did everything for my kids and my husband. I said yesterday, excuse my language, but I did everything but wipe my husband's butt. I did everything for him. I was the chief enabler. So when I went to Al-Anon and they taught me to start taking care of myself, my family didn't like it. And, most families don't when the codependent, the Al-Anon, begins to take care of themselves. So let me briefly go through these tips, and I want you to talk. I want you to, if you will, share what recovery is like for you in your family. Have you changed? Are you still expecting the addict to change? Are you waiting until they change before you change? You may be waiting a lifetime. Remember that, being sick, sober, and AA, what I just said. Okay, so the tips for the family is come face to face with reality. You know, it is real. Addictions are real. Educate yourself. Not all of you folks are educated. You know about the disease. And hopefully there'll be some new people that will be listening to this. Learn about the disease of alcoholism and all of the addictions that we talk about. You know, it is a mental and emotional disease. Addicts are not doing anything toward the family. They are taking it out on themselves. It is an addiction, it's a disease. And a lot of family members, I thought my mother and my husband always drank at me. That was my self-centeredness. I thought it was all about me. You know, that my house wasn't clean enough and you could eat off the floors if you wanted to. It was so spotless. The kids always looked good. I mean, I made sure everything was in order. So it wouldn't be my fault that he drank, and he drank anyway. And then I thought it was because I was fat. I always thought he drank because I was overweight. So, see, family members are so self-centered. We're all focused on ourselves. So anyway, come face to face with reality. Educate yourself about the addiction, whether it's an eating disorder or drugs and alcohol. Number 2, to discover how to really love an addict, how to love an addictive person and stay healthy yourself. I will give you one word. Go to Al-Anon. Al-Anon is for families and friends of alcoholics. It was designed for that. Our co-founder, Bill W., he had a wonderful wife, Lois, and she enabled him and stayed with him, and they looked for help. She gave him her life, everything. And it was just the two of them, and they loved each other, but the sicker Bill got, the sicker Lois got. And long story short, Bill got sober because of the last trip to John's hospital. He had what we call a spiritual awakening, a flash of light, spiritual awakening. And all he said were the words, "God help me." And he reported later seeing a vision inside that room. I believe it, I believe in Jesus, I believe in God, I believe that was God present. And Bill was such a bad old alcoholic. I believe God knew, boy, I've got to send something to get that guy's attention. And from that point on, he had what we call a spiritual experience, It happens very little. I mean, I have seen maybe 10 people have that flash of light type of spiritual experience like Paul had on the Damascus Road. You know, Paul, and I'm not a Bible thumper, but I've got to share this. His name was Saul. He was mean. He was awful. He was a tax collector. And like that, he was changed. And he was one of the greatest ministers that the Bible shows, and he taught us a lot, how to live. Even his name changed, and that was Paul. And so, very few had what Bill had. But then he met, 4 months later, a guy named Dr. Bob. I won't go into all of it, but Bill helped Bob get sober. But Bob could not stay sober. He didn't want to drink, but he couldn't keep from drinking. And so for 2 solid years, the way that Dr. Bob did not drink was by working with other drugs. He'd go to his office, work with his patients, and then he would leave and go out to the worst part of town and work with drugs. They say that Dr. Bob single-handedly built up that Akron, Ohio group. So we have 2 ways, the spiritual experience, and Dr. Bob had what we call a spiritual awakening. By the way, Dr. Bob was very religious. We can be as religious and believe in God all we want to and die of addiction if we don't stop acting that. Because we'll turn everything in the world over. The man I was talking to last night is a godly man. He is a very godly man. And he stood there and he said, well, I never thought about asking God to help me with the food. And we don't. Even godly religious people do not think about enlisting the aid of God on their sex addiction. Anyway, I am so on a roll. I am preaching and I want to stop. But anyway, get healthy yourself and go to Al-Anon. I even tell people in AA, if you really want to make a difference in your family system, go to Al-Anon, because you're going to learn how to live for not only you're going to learn how to treat yourself and how to treat your family. Go to some Al-Anon meetings, not early in sobriety, but a couple of years of sobriety. Go sit in some Al-Anon meetings. And I've got a friend right here named Joseph, and I'm going to ask him to talk in a few minutes because he's a prime example. I don't need to tell his story. Number 3, give it up. You can't control or fix an addict, another person, so just stop trying. If you're trying to fix somebody, you are wasting your time. Get off their back, get out of their way, go on with your own life, and on that road to your own life, go to Al-Anon. Take care of yourself. Number 4, stop blaming the alcoholic or the eating disorder person for everything in your life and become willing to look at yourself. My dad and I did this after I moved to Abilene, 165 miles from my mother. If I didn't want to do something, I'd say, well, I can't do that because my mother's sick. Well, she was sick all my life, but my dad and I both used my mother, his wife, being sick, so we wouldn't have to face our own responsibilities. So quit letting the addict run your life and, and become willing to look at yourself. We all get sick. Elvis's mother died of alcoholism. If you haven't seen the movie, she drank herself to death because she missed her baby boy. And she was very religious, and I'm not putting down religion. I'm not, but she was very religious. But she could not stop drinking, and she died of alcoholism. And if the family doesn't get help themselves, they too can become addicts. So number 5, learn the difference between helping and enabling. All of us, even addicts, we all need help at some point. But every time the alcoholics in my life would get almost to their bottom, they'd be really bad. And the AAs would tell me, leave them alone, don't interfere. And I couldn't stand the pain of watching my loved ones suffer, so I would rush in and rescue them. And I was far sicker than they were. And when I got to Al-Anon, I learned, get off their back, get out of their way, go on with your own life. You can love them, but just don't love an addict to death. And we can by enable them to stay sick. And how you enable them to stay sick, I'll give you one perfect example. My husband was store manager before he went into business for himself, but he was store manager of a company. And my husband was a running drunk. When he drank, he'd be gone 3 or 4 days. If he didn't come home for supper at 6 o'clock, I knew we wouldn't see him till Monday morning if I was lucky. So he'd been gone since Friday, hadn't come home, hadn't heard from him, had babies and had his children, and I didn't sleep a wink. I would walk on the floor worrying, and I'd make the rounds of all the honky tonks, couldn't find him, all of that. So come Monday morning, I've probably told you all that. I probably don't have one story that I haven't told. But anyway, come Monday morning, I was worried about his job. I was worried about not getting that check, him getting fired. So I called, this is what we call enabling, folks, and trying to help. I called his place of business, and the owner happened to be there from Odessa. He normally was not there, and he answered the phone. And I told him, I said, well, I just wanted to, I was real meek. I was so shy. I couldn't hardly say a word. I just wanted to let y'all know that RL was sick and he wouldn't be in work today. And he said, oh, what does he have? Well, he has the flu. Well, how bad is it? Oh, he's really bad. And then he said, you know, it's interesting, Tennie, I'm looking through the plate glass window into Ariel's office, and he's sitting in there at his desk. That is what enabling is. And then we look like fools. We lie, we cover up for addicts because, well, I wanted that paycheck for one thing, and I didn't want him to lose his job. And I couldn't stop and let God intervene. I didn't know anything about that this was a disease. I just thought my husband didn't want to come home because of me and the kids. So, number 6, stop giving in to manipulation. There is nothing, addicts, and I'm including myself, eating disorder people, we are manipulators. We can get Academy Awards for being manipulators. Any of y'all manipulated your family ever? We will lie to them. We will cover up. You know, there would be, I'd have food in the refrigerator for my little kids' lunch. And I was a night eater. I'd get up and eat all of the food. And then I would sometimes, particularly while he was still drinking, I would manipulate my husband to go to not all the time, but talk him and manipulate him into going to the store and getting some food to replace where I could pack my kids' lunches. That's manipulation. Had he been healthier, he would have looked in there and he would have known there was food in there and that I had eaten it all up. That's what manipulation is. We get our families to cover up and lie for us. All right, number 7. Ask yourself this magic question. Y'all want to know what the magic question is? Here it is. How would my life be better if I wasn't consumed by the behavior of enabling a loved one? That's the magic question. How would my life be better if I wasn't focused on enabling the addict in my life? I'll tell you, Al-Anon works. I spent 14 years in Al-Anon family group before my husband ever went to his first AA meeting. And what happened is I grew up in Al-Anon, literally grew up. They taught me so much about myself and how it was, and I was a rager. I hated myself. He would get drunk, I'd beat him up, and I would rage at him, and then the next morning I would apologize to him. We used to speak at little AA groups throughout part of West Texas after he got a year of sobriety. And he'd always introduce me as Tennie Apologize McCarty. He'd say, I'd get drunk and she'd apologize. What I was apologizing for, and I wasn't telling him then that I'd been beating him up when he was in a blackout. I beat him up with the vacuum cleaner the wand, not the hose, the wand, the metal wand. That's what I was guilty of, and raging at him. Because I want him to talk to me and tell me why he was drinking, all of that BS. So ask yourself the magic question. What would your life be better? Would your life be better if you wasn't focused on the addict? And I got happy in Al-Anon while my husband was still drinking. I went back to school. I became a counselor. I helped start a treatment program in Abilene while my husband was still drinking. He donated money. He would bring cartons of cigarettes to the clients at the treatment center while in denial of his own problem. Denial is don't even know I'm lying. He would say, well, I just drank every 2-3 months. Well, every time he took a drink of alcohol, he ordered up a drink. He could never drink without, anyway. But I will tell you, one day, in January the 31st of 1982. I had left my husband alone and about his drinking, and the kids went on about their life. They went to Alateens. They hated me for making them go, but they needed help, and so they went to some, but they hated them. Kara, did you hate Alateens? Shake your head if you did. But we went on with our own lives, the children, myself. And I loved him just where he was. And one day I went up and told him, and he kind of flashed because he never knew what I was going to say. But, I went up and put my arms around him one day and I said, honey, I love you. I'll always love you, but I am not going to love and support your addiction anymore and take care of you. I'm going to be here for today, but I may not be here forever. I don't know. I can't live like this forever. And I just started loving him. And that helped that man more than anything. Me loving him in spite of his behavior. I just went on with my life and I love him. And I was gone a lot. And he got worse. He got worse. But one day, January 31st, 1982, he made a decision that he wanted to be sober. I'm not bragging on myself, I'm bragging on Al-Anon. And he included this every time he told his story. But the other people in the AA group got up. He got up that Sunday night and told the AA group, he said, I don't know what you folks have here, but my wife has been coming to this building for years, and I want what she has. That is the ultimate compliment that an alcoholic can give an Al-Anon. He said, she has changed, and I want what she has. And, that changed our life. Our marriage didn't get better for several years because he needed to focus on his alcoholism and his recovery. And we traveled the world going to meetings, and that was a fun time. And then later we did really work on the marriage, but that took a while. So, all right, that magic question. And then 8, know that self-care is not being selfish. I started going on trips before I wouldn't even go anywhere because I stayed home with my kids. I used my kids as an excuse to get better and I did have a house full of kids and they didn't need me. But the first women's retreat, AA and Al-Anon retreat that was for women I went to down at Brownwood, they practically dragged me down there, the people in Al-Anon and the AA women. And in the middle of the night, I walked down to the highway and tried to catch a ride home. I was 75 miles from home, to come home and see what he was doing and to check on my kids. He was still, drinking. But I was so obsessed with my kids and my husband. When I got home, Karen, that's right there, I think she was about 8. I walked in, that house was cleaned up. Her and her dad, I don't know if she remembers it, but her and her dad had cooked supper. They had made cornbread. And you know how I felt? Was I pleased with that? It hurt my feelings because I thought they can get along without me. That was what a sick, someone that's not in recovery from codependency thinks. Well, they can get along without me, instead of, really being happy for, what they did. And my husband was pleased with himself that he did not drink. He took care of our children that weekend. And he still drank for a long time after that. So in the early days, my youngest daughter is getting ready to be 54. I went to Al-Anon when she was a baby, just a baby. And one time, I went out to get in the car to go to the meeting. He had taken the distributor cap off my car so that I didn't know at the time, the car wouldn't start. He locked the door and wouldn't let me back in the house. And he was in there with 5 or 6 kids. I had a baby. I walked down to a store, which was a mile, and there was a payphone. That was before cell phones, but there was a payphone down there, and I called my sponsor and told her, and she came out and picked up me and my baby. It was too late to go to the Al-Anon meeting, but she sat on that parking lot, and we had an Al-Anon meeting together. That call was probably one of the most important calls that I'd ever made. And my husband hated for me to go to Al-Anon, and my kids hated it at first. So anyway, know that it's okay to take care of yourself. And number 9, rebuild your own life, whatever that takes. Get a life. You know, if you need to go to school and get an education, get one. If you're married to a woman, alcoholic, you can have a social life. Just don't go find someone outside marriage. Be faithful in your marriage. Love the person that you went to the party with. Love that person. But, you know, get a life. It's okay for you to have a life outside of living with an active addict. And number 10 is don't wait until the situation gets really bad. Reach out for help now. You know, I'm sad to say there are family members, beloved family members of mine, that are still knee-deep in the addiction of alcoholism. And it saddens me that I can't do anything. I mean, I'm in a treatment center. I've worked in the field for years. I've been in recovery for years. I can't help my own family. The only thing I can do is live this program in front of them and love them where they are. Excuse me. It's painful. It is painful to live with an addict and watch him die one day at a time. And like I said, during when I started recovering from my eating disorder, several of my children said, particularly my 2 oldest daughters, said my eating disorder affected them more than their dad's alcoholism, because I coupled mine with perfectionism. I covered it with rage. You know, mine, you know, he drank and passed out. I was the one that did harm to the children. So it's a family disease. Any way you look at it, everyone's affected. If you have a dog, that dog, if there was Dog, you'd need to take your dog to Dog, because everybody's addicted from the disease. I want to open this up. We've got some new people. We've got some middle people. We've got some long-term people. Talk to us about what did you do going back into your home with the family. How did you start treating the family? You know, did the family go to Al-Anon? Did you encourage them to go to Al-Anon? Did you invite them to go to open AA meetings with you? Did you invite them to go to OA meetings with you? Did you invite them to go to Al-Anon with you? Did you invite them on your journey of recovery? Not that they, you know, without the thought of them recovering. So I'm going to open it up. How has it been for you and your family since you have been in recovery?